Hey there, welcome back. In the last lesson, we had a look into the sectors and how society is structured so an urbanist can act. Now we are going to have a look into the spheres that an urbanist can act. And I would like to start with opposing two disciplines that are very close to my heart because some of you might come from architecture, like myself. And this is a very clear way to have a look on how these disciplines have a very different approach and nature, actually. To start with architecture, when we think about architecture, we what really pop into our minds are the building, right? So we are talking about houses, buildings, schools, libraries. Well, they are very tangible. And also, the scope is very tangible. The scope of the work is very tangible. So, normally, the client come to you as an architect and say, "Hey, I would like a house with 3 bedrooms, or I would like an office space for 700 people." So, it's very tangible, and you have a closed scope. So, you know what you need to produce, right? And as I said, it's all about the building. So it's a library, it's an airport, it's a house, it's a bigger house at the beach. I don't know, but it's really about the building. And at some point, this is very predictable because we are talking about a project or something that is going to be built. And in the end, it's going to be there. So the project becomes reality, right? So it's really focused on the result. So you have a program and then you execute the project and then you get your house with 3 bedrooms or your office space for 700 people. So architecture is very tangible. While urbanism, actually we're talking about society and cities and everything that goes into a city. So the scope is really large. And well, it can always be added something, right? And there are lots of things that goes under the umbrella scope of urbanism. So we are really talking about society and its challenges, not only about the buildings itself. Of course, architecture is also conceived to solve many of the problems of the people that are going to be in there. But when we're talking about urbanism, we're talking about lots of things. Also the buildings, but not only the buildings. So it's really open as a scope. It talks about society and in some sense kind of unpredictable because you may start with something and during the processes other elements are going to be added to it and you end up with something different than you imagined in the first place. So it's really about this process, not only about the result itself. Of course we are working towards a result, but the process is really important. So I'm not saying that in architecture it's not, but I'm just saying that it's different because once you agree something with your client, it's going to be most likely that, right? So you're going to follow the plan you created. While in urbanism, this is much more flexible and lots of things can come up into the way. And that's why we're going to have a deeper look throughout this course into that. So when you look at your city, you might see some problems. Lots of cities have lots of problems, and that's why we like urbanism because they're very complex problems for us to solve. And of course, when you look at the city, you might face some housing problems. So people doesn't have where to live, and this is urbanism. So housing or the lack of it, definitely urbanism. And also, if you look into your city and people cannot move around safely, or it doesn't have a good public transportation, and they are somewhat stuck. So when we think about mobility or the lack of it, this is also urbanism. When we're talking about, for instance, air quality and pollution, air quality or the lack of it is also an urbanism issue. And if we think about basic sanitation or the lack of it, this is also an urbanism problem. Same for greenery in cities. So trees, urban trees, or not having them, it's also urbanism. So when we think about urbanism, actually is really all about public policy. So it really goes hand in hand with public policy. And what are public policies? So public policies are really intended and goal oriented. So the idea is really to have a public interest behind what we are going to tackle as a society issue. And to do so, of course, you need a legitimacy because not anyone can say what everyone needs, right? So we really need to have an elected government to say that this is the best for everyone. So you have to have a legitimacy to do the actions that need to be done. And also, it's all about decision making because you will have lots of challenges along the way and you will multiple times need to change and make a new decision. And of course, it is linked to all the instruments of public policy. So, public policy are really there to tackle society issues. And of course, as the word says for itself, public policies go hand in hand with the public sector. So, the public sector, that as we saw, it can be at various levels. So, we can have the municipal state, so the city government that is very close to our daily lives, or the state, or for instance, in many countries we have different states, or even the national level, so the federal level for those countries that are federate. But the thing is, we have different levels of government, but they all produce public policy. And if you remember having a look at the world of yellow, we mentioned briefly about the public policy cycle. So when we study public administration, this is one of the very first lessons because you need to understand how a public policy is produced. So you have the very first moment of identifying the problem or the issue that we want to tackle, and then this phase is called the agenda setting. And then we have the formulation and adoption. So you will need to understand what are the actions that you need to take in order to solve that problem that you identified. And then of course you pass into action, right? So you implement those policies in order to see if they are being effective and if they are really solving daily people problem. And of course, you will need to monitor and evaluate to understand if this is really, really being effective. And in the end, of course, you're always trying to maintain getting feedback and also maybe sometimes going back to the agenda setting to twist the different things. So it's really a cycle and um, it's not an overnight thing. As I said, it's all about the process. And for all the problems that we just saw, we can have different public policies, right? So let's have a look at the formulation of public policies and how are the different spheres that an urbanist can. So as I said, there is this moment of agenda setting. Then we have this moment of planning. Then we go to a project. So we really try to implement something more concrete. And then we have the execution of that project. And then finally the evaluation. So it's kind of going in a funnel, let's say. We're coming from big ideas into a very concrete actions that are measured and very tangible. So when we think about that, let's look into a real public policy in order to understand these different steps. So you could see how you could fit as an urbanist in these different phases. So let's have a look how the city of Paris implemented cycling as a mobility public policy. So let's have a look how this all not only started, but of course the city of Paris have already been doing different actions. But during COVID, so we had a boom in the city of new cyclists because it was an effective way to commute without being stuck in public transportation, for instance, not being crowded. So people were had air. So cycling boomed in most cities. And at that point, the city of Paris said that they wanted to inverse the logic. So they wanted the bicycles to bypass the car. So they wanted an increase of the use of the bicycle and a drop of the use of the car inside the city of Paris. So this is a moment that the public policy was being formulated. So the public policy was to give more space to cycling in detriment of the cars, right? So they wanted to have a shift. So you could see that by the year of 2024, they were planning to have this shift. So back in 2020, they said, in 4 years, we're going to inverse this logic. So, of course, this is an objective. So, this is an agenda. This is a public policy. So, this is it's a political thinking, right? So, this is more like an idea, a goal, as I said. Then, what did they do? They passed to the planning phase. So they said, okay, let's establish a plan. So let's have a plan. And they got all the specialists together, lots of urban planners, of course, and then they draw what Paris would look like by the end of 2026 when all of the cycling lanes would be implemented. So they kind of saw where would be the best place to have a cycling lane, what are the places that was more adapted. So this was really the planning phase. So the idea here was to have a bigger plan and stick to it. Then, of course, we go to the project phase. The project phase, of course, is really, really sitting down in every one of those streets that were mapped in the previous in the plan and go down to understand how this cycling lane would be executed, right? So where do they pass? Where the bus pass and the pedestrians? So are we taking the place from the car? So we going also to extend the sidewalk or not? So this is really sitting down and put that into project. This is also a very important phase that, of course, here we go more into architecture, but this is still something that has to have the eye of an urbanist because you can merge this different layers of the city into the project. And then, of course, we have the phase of execution. So all those cycling lanes have to be built. And then, of course, there are different people that are supervising all this work throughout the city. But also, the execution is the phase that can benefit from the eyes of an urbanist. And last but definitely not least, you remember that I said that Paris had this idea, this agenda to change and inverse the logic, and they did it. So they said in 2024 we are going to uh, have more cyclists than cars in our street, and they did it. So they had a report that was made by the Institute Paris region, and they really went into the field to interview people and get to know, get their feedback also in the project itself. And they saw that people really are using more and more and more the bicycles, and they really inverted this logic. So now walking is the primary, and it always has been the very first mode of transportation here in Paris, and then followed by the public transit, but then it comes right after cycling. And in the past, it used to be the car. So this is how like, this is a very tangible example of how a public policy was transformed into a plan, and then it was transformed into a project, and then executed, and then evaluated and measured. And in all of those spheres, an urbanist, of course, is highly welcome to give it input. So that was it for this class. I guess the sum of this class, the sum up, is really to remember that if you are in more in this area, that it's more uh, the agenda setting, it's all about the public policies. So you are more uh, inclined to a political view of urbanism, while when you're going down and down, it becomes more and more technical and more tangible. So this, I think, it's something that is really nice to retain, because as an urbanist, you need to understand all these different angles that are attached to the act of an urbanist. So I hope you enjoyed, and see you in the next class.